I'm Alderson. I'm an architect by profession, but have worked mainly in research most of my career, and for the last 5 years I've worked for the Centre for Accessible Environments as an access consultant part-time. The Centre for Accessible Environments is a unique organisation that brings together everybody concerned with the built environment and accessibility, and is mainly concerned with inclusive design, not just design for disabled people. We want to make the environment good for everybody to use. My current work has been writing a book on stairs, ramps and escalators, which will be published next spring. And this is design guidance for inclusive design, and in particular tries to explain why things need to be done, why the recommendations are there. The book will look at the design issues that are involved in these 3 elements, and it also includes moving walks, as they're very similar to escalators. It's highly illustrated and tries to show examples of good design, not just meeting the recommendations, but ways that the spirit of the recommendations can be met as well by interesting design, because a lot of people, particularly architects, think that recommendations and regulations inhibit their design, and what we want to show is that good design can improve the environment for everybody. Inclusive design isn't a constraint on design, it's a challenge to design, and I think it's a great challenge for architects, and they should realise that they can make a huge difference to not only disabled people but to the whole population. It is possible to have stunning designs and still meet the recommendations. For wayfinding, for example, different floors of the building can be in different colours and tones so that people can identify which floor of the building they're on. This has been used very effectively, for example, in the Evelina Children's Hospital in London. For spatial awareness, it's very important that the floor surfaces visually contrast with the walls, and particularly the skirtings, so that the actual line of where the junction is should be defined. This helps people to realise the space that they're in, and if the floors and the walls are the same colour, they feel they're in a much larger space than they really are in. Things like doors need to visually contrast so that they can find them easily and know where to go to find them. Signage is very important for wayfinding and for identifying where stairs are, and also for identifying where there's an alternative means of access for people who can't use the stairs. One of the areas for changes in level where floor surfaces are important is ramps, and the surface of the ramp should visually contrast with the area at the top and bottom of it so that people can identify where the slope is. Because if they can't identify it, particularly if it's a small, shallow ramp, just replacing a single step, it's very easy to stumble and trip on it. And also many of those ramps don't have handrails to help identify them either. For stairs, it's important that each step is identified by a nosing that wraps round the edge of the step, partially on the tread and partially on the riser, but it must be on the edge of the step, because if it's not, people will not realise where the edge is, and again could fall and trip if it's set back on the tread from the edge of the step. The advisory document M recommends that nosings are provided on all steps and stairs, on the tread and on the riser. These nosings should visually contrast with the step, they should have sufficient slip resistance, and they should preferably be square-edged, not rounded, because there's much more potential for falling on a rounded edge, which is where the foot is actually moving. The reason that nosings should go round the step is that so that people can see when they're looking down the edge of the steps, and equally when they're looking up the edge of the steps. It's vitally important for the nosing to be slip resistant, because the nosing, the edge of the step, is where the foot is bending, and the smaller the step, the more important the slip resistance is, because less of the foot is actually on the tread of the step. Stairs are obviously an important means of access for different levels of a building, and they are one of the highest risk areas for accidents, and therefore it's very important that they are designed properly. Nosings are only one aspect of this. Stairs should also be the correct dimensions, should have handrails, should be well lit. The Disability Discrimination Act is civil rights legislation. It's not something you can comply with. Service providers must comply with it to provide their services without discrimination. Buildings, products, and anything like that cannot comply with the Disability Discrimination Act. Where buildings come into it is that a service provider, to provide their service, obviously uses a building, and therefore if they can make the building more accessible, they can make their services more accessible. New buildings should be fully accessible to everybody, regardless of their disability or ability, whereas existing buildings, obviously, it's very difficult to make them fully accessible, and 80 to 90% of our current building stock is existing pre the Disability Discrimination Act. For these buildings, it's necessary to look how improvements can be made, and this includes alterations and improvements to physical features. I think the most common problem for inclusive environments is not the physical accessibility, because people, if they think of disabled people, think of people in wheelchairs, and that's actually a very small percentage of the population. I think one of the common faults is people with visual impairments. They're not catered for, and actually that's one of the simplest things to do and one of the least expensive things to do to improve a building. Making physical alterations to give physical access to wheelchairs can be very difficult in existing buildings, particularly listed or historic buildings. Making visual contrast, increasing visual contrast, it can be relatively easily done in most circumstances. And should be done, but people don't understand that, and it's not until you explain to people who don't have a visual impairment why you're doing this that they realise and understand how important it can be.